Welcome to a place where the soil remembers every drop of blood spilled upon it. Louisiana, 1863. The fields stretch endlessly under a relentless sun, cotton bolls trembling in the heat, and yet beneath this tranquil facade there lies a secret. A story that the textbooks never dared to tell. Families bound by chains, their names erased from records, their existence reduced to entries in runaway slave ads, fate unknown. They worked from dawn until the dusk swallowed the horizon, their sweat nourishing the very fields that fed the wealth of others. And still at night the air carried whispers, ghostly footsteps in the cabins, faint lullabies sung to children who would never see freedom, shadows flickering in the corners where no lantern shone. Before we go further, before you hear the voices that have lingered for more than a century, take a moment. Leave a comment. Where are you watching from? What hour does the wind reach your city tonight? And think of those who walk these fields unseen, unheard, unrecorded. Yet their story begins here. And now. Some say that the spirits of the enslaved linger here still, walking among the rows of cotton, retracing the paths of forced labor, their cries caught in the wind that sweeps across the bayou. The overseers never spoke of it. No official report could capture the trembling fear in those eyes, the quiet defiance that simmered under the yoke of brutality. Yet, in the hidden diaries, in the smuggled letters, in the hushed tales passed from mother to child, there remains a record, an echo, of lives that refuse to be forgotten. It begins with one man, or perhaps one woman, someone who disappeared into the night, leaving only footprints in the mud, and a silence so heavy it seemed to swallow the plantation whole. Fate unknown, the notice read, but the truth, if truth can be captured in words, was far more complex. They walked into the darkness, carrying secrets, carrying sorrow, carrying dreams that could not be named. And there was one night that changed the rhythm of this plantation forever. Lanterns extinguished a sudden wind sweeping through the cotton, and a sound. Not quite human, not quite animal, but something in between. A warning or a promise, depending on who you asked. Some claimed it was the spirit of a child lost to the fields. Others whispered that it was the march of a phantom regiment, soldiers bound by duty in life and unrest in death. The year was 1863. And the air hung heavy over Louisiana, thick with the smell of damp earth and the acrid tang of burning cane in the distance. The sun rose slowly over the flat, endless fields, casting a pale white light on the cotton bolls, each one trembling in the heat, each one carrying a weight no man or woman should bear. The plantations sprawled like silent cities, their wooden cabins darkened by soot and shadow, surrounded by gnarled oak trees whose roots dug deep into soil, soaked with generations of labor. Every path between the rows of cotton seemed measured by the steps of those who had walked it 1,000 times before their backs bent beneath invisible burdens, their hands roughened and calloused yet precise. The soundscape of the day was a symphony of labor. The rhythmic thump of hoes striking the earth, the creak of wooden wheels over dirt roads. Children's laughter, faint, almost hidden under the commanding voice of overseers. And in the distance, the low murmur of the Mississippi River, carrying secrets along its winding course. Whispers of men and women who had passed this way before, and whispers of those who would never return. At night the wind would shift, rustling the leaves of the cypress trees lining the bayous, carrying a scent of decay, of sweat, and of something else. Something that could not be named, something that clung to the corners of the cabins and the shadows beneath the porches. The plantations themselves were labyrinths. A network of buildings, fields, and hidden paths, known only to those who lived and breathed the oppression daily. The cabins were small, cramped, the wooden walls thin enough for every word, every cry, every lament to escape into the night. Inside, the air was thick with smoke from cooking fires and the mingling odors of hard labor and human fatigue. Families were huddled together for warmth and comfort. Some whispered stories to their children to instill courage, others recited prayers for protection. And yet beyond the walls the overseer's eyes always watched. The overseer's ears always listened, their presence a constant, oppressive shadow. In the market towns nearby, life continued on a surface of normalcy. Merchants called out their wares, horse-drawn carts rumbled over cobblestones, and the streets bustled with a mix of soldiers, laborers, and townsfolk. But even here the boundaries were stark visible. The free and the enslaved existed side by side, yet worlds apart. And the enslaved, when permitted to pass through these streets, did so with heads lowered, hearts racing, as if the very air carried judgment and danger. The scent of fresh bread from bakeries mingled with the tang of river mud and horse dung. Children chased each other in the alleys while women carried water and baskets of goods. Yet all the while, the quiet tension of a life under watchful eyes lingered like a shadow stretching across the town. Beyond the towns, deeper into the swamplands and forests, the environment changed. The ground became soggy. The trees dense the canopy above, blotting out sunlight in patches. Here the enslaved found their small moments of freedom. Paths hidden from the main roads, clearings where the soil softened beneath bare feet. Streams where water was clean and cold. And yet even here the past seemed to cling. Old stories spoke of people who had vanished into the woods, never to return, swallowed by the mystery of the night, by the mists rising from the swamps. Some said that spirits lingered among the cypress knees, glowing faintly under moonlight. Others claimed that on certain nights one could hear the faint rhythm of drums, echoes of ceremonies once performed in secret passed down from Africa through the generations. The rhythm of life on the plantation was punctuated by these hidden moments, moments where resilience bloomed quietly beneath the weight of oppression. Songs were hummed softly during work, not just to pass the time, but to communicate, to warn, to remember. Spirituals carried coded messages, directions for escape, hope for a future that had yet to come. The language of the songs was layered, a mixture of sorrow and defiance, sorrow and determination. Every note a testament to survival, every pause a breath held against the threat of discovery. The seasons brought their own textures to the landscape. Summer brought unbearable heat, sweat soaking through clothing and flies that seemed to torment endlessly. Fall carried the smell of decaying leaves, the early chill in the mornings, and the harvest that demanded every ounce of strength from hands already raw. Winter, cold and wet, found the cabins shivering fires. Burning low, children huddled in blankets patched with scraps, while adults recounted stories of ancestors who had endured, who had survived. Spring brought promise of fragile green along the edges of fields. Yet even this renewal was tinged with sorrow. Each new blossom reminded them of what had been lost. Each sprouting cotton boll a symbol of labor extracted at unimaginable cost. And over all of this loomed the constant presence of power owners, overseers, the social structures designed to crush spirit and assert dominion. Yet in hidden corners, in whispers behind closed doors, in notes passed surreptitiously, a different world existed. A world of cunning, of knowledge, of resistance. Small rebellions, a tool hidden in a sack, a seed planted in secret, a message left beneath a floorboard. These were fragments of defiance, fragile as spider silk, yet stronger than anyone who had tried to oppress them could imagine. This was a land of contradictions, beauty and horror intertwined. The river sparkled under sunlight, reflecting the sky in shades of gold and blue. Yet beneath it, currents carried the weight of uncounted lives. Birds sang their songs, yet their cries seemed mournful when heard through the ears of those who labored without hope of freedom. The air smelled of jasmine and earth and smoke, simultaneously sweet and suffocating. The world was alive, vibrant, cinematic. Yet every frame was tinged with tension, with unease, with a quiet despair that could not be erased. As the day progressed, the labor continued. Hands blistered, backs bent, eyes focused on the horizon, or on the next task, or on the fleeting moment of respite that might arrive with the shadow of a tree, with a passing breeze. And in these moments, stories were shared. Not openly, not aloud, but in glances and gestures, in the subtle transmission of knowledge passed down from one generation to the next. Tales of escape of spirits of ancestors who had walked before, who had survived the unthinkable. The folklore became inseparable from the facts of their lives. Every whispered legend grounded in reality, every recorded fact steeped in the shadows of myth. And so, the stage was set. Louisiana, 1863. Fields stretching under relentless sun, cabins dark and oppressive, swamplands dense and mysterious, towns bustling but segregated, hidden paths of freedom threading through the landscape. The constant tension of labor and oppression, the interwoven threads of folklore and fact. Every sight, every sound, every scent creating a living tapestry, a canvas upon which the human spirit would struggle, resist, and endure. Before the story unfolds further, imagine yourself here. Hear the hum of work. Smell the dust and smoke. Feel the heat pressing down the chill of the night, the quiet tremor of secrets kept and passed along. And know this world is both real and haunted, and what you are about to witness is only the beginning. The first records are stark, cold, yet they speak volumes. Runaway slave ads inked in black on pale paper. The words "fate unknown" appearing repeatedly. Names listed like inventory. John 23, Mary 17, Ezekiel 12. And beside each a description of scars of height of distinguishing marks. The human reduced to detail, the soul invisible in the letters sent to newspapers, posted on posts, handed from hand to hand. Yet in these records, something survives. A hint of life, a flicker of will. The very fact that someone noticed, that someone cared enough to record, is a testament to existence that refuses to vanish completely. Amid these dry words, life pulsated, the hidden heartbeat beneath oppression. Mary, for instance, remembered in the ledger for her quick temper and strong arms, carried the memory of her mother's lullabies whispered beneath the low beams of the cabin. She hummed them quietly as she worked the cotton, not only to soothe the children nearby, but to send coded messages. Be ready. Be careful. The night holds danger. The songs carried instructions hidden in their rhythm notes, rising and falling like the tides. Work slowed sometimes when the melody paused at certain lines, a signal to hide, to duck, to avoid the overseer's glance. Outside the cabin walls in the fields, the bodies bent and straightened rhythmically, like reeds in the wind, the sun climbing higher and higher, the heat pressing down like a weight that could crush bones, if not for endurance. Hands tore through the cotton eyes, squinting against the glare, breath coming in long hisses, punctuated by the thud of feet and the creak of carts. And yet even here stories were told, whispered under the shade of oak trees, hidden in the tall grass. Tales of those who had vanished into the swamps, legends of spirits who guided the weary, warnings of danger beyond the river bend, and the courage to keep moving forward despite it all. Among these whispered tales, one story persisted. The story of Samuel, who disappeared one humid summer night. No ledger marked his absence at first, but neighbors noted his bed empty, the blanket neatly folded, as if he had never slept there. Only the footprints in the mud led into the cypress swamps. And there, some said he found sanctuary, others claimed he became part of the folklore himself. A shadow moving between trees, guiding others to safety, a phantom whose existence straddled fact and myth. The human scene was never static. The enslaved were constantly negotiating the world around them. A glance could signal rebellion. A hand gesture could indicate a planned escape. Even a song hummed softly in the night could be a message of hope, a reminder that life extended beyond the fields. And yet the overseer's eyes were everywhere sharp, and calculating. Punishments could come without warning, and so subtlety became an art survival, a dance between visibility and invisibility. Fact layer continued in the official reports of the Freedmen's Bureau. Detailed accounts of labor contracts, beatings, escapes, and disappearances. Letters written to officials described the harsh conditions, the unpaid labor, the strategies used to maintain some semblance of autonomy. In one report, a woman named Lillian is noted to have disappeared into the night with a bundle of cornmeal and a small child, her fate unknown. But local folklore insists she survived traveling by hidden paths, aided by spirits of her ancestors. Each entry was a record of tragedy, yet also a record of quiet resistance of life, refusing to yield entirely to oppression. The blend of fact and folklore thickened as stories intersected with legend. WPA narratives collected decades later spoke of people seeing lights dancing over the fields at night, guiding those who dared to flee, or warning them of unseen dangers. The oral histories told by elders in the 1920s confirmed similar accounts. Children recalled their grandparents pointing toward the swamp, whispering, "Don't go alone. The spirits watch. But they also protect, if you respect them." These layers, the documented and the remembered, coexisted, each reinforcing the other, giving depth to lives that the official records barely recognized. Every day the work itself was a narrative, a rhythm that communicated stories as much as it produced cotton. The repetitive motions created space for memory, for reflection, for subtle acts of defiance. Fingers weaving through stalks became gestures of connection. A shared glance across the field carried meaning. And songs provided cover for whispered lessons, for passing on knowledge too dangerous to speak aloud. The very act of survival became a coded narrative written into the fabric of labor itself. And yet, danger was constant. An overseer's approach could turn a quiet song into a panic. The snap of a twig, the shadow crossing a path, the sudden gust of wind, these were signals that demanded immediate reaction. Children learned early, the instinct to duck, to hide, to speak in half-truths, to trust only certain voices. The plantation was a stage, and everyone played a role. Some visible, some hidden. Some willingly, others out of necessity. One cannot overlook the psychological landscape. Fear interwoven with courage, despair tempered by hope. Every dawn brought exhaustion and anxiety. Every dusk brought a mix of relief and anticipation. In cabins, families gathered around smoldering fires, telling stories to keep the past alive, to preserve lineage and identity. These stories were often magical, sometimes frightening, but always instructive. They taught lessons of resilience, of navigation, through danger of survival strategies. The folklore was a roadmap, the history a warning. And together, they prepared the next generation to endure, to resist, to dream. A particularly haunting tale from this era involved a small settlement near the edge of the bayou. People reported seeing a procession of figures moving silently at night. Some identified them as former enslaved people who had died on the plantation, walking again in spectral form. Others claimed they were scouts for those planning escape. Footsteps soft on the wet earth, whispers floating over the water, the faint glow of lanterns that never were lit. Each account differed, yet the pattern remained. A narrative of resistance and memory of human spirit intertwined with myth. The human scene was further complicated by war. News of battles reached the fields in fragments, men conscripted into militias. Rumors of black regiments marching far away. Letters arriving late, often censored. The impact on families immediate and profound. Mothers worried for sons who might never return. Children asked questions too difficult to answer. And the folklore absorbed these fears. Tales of phantom regiments marching in the night, of spectral soldiers appearing on the edges of fields, of warnings carried by the wind through the trees. Reality and imagination blended, each feeding the other. Even mundane objects became carriers of stories. A cooking pot, a worn quilt, a broken spindle. Each held the memory of labor, of loss, of survival. A stitch in a quilt could indicate the route to freedom. A particular knot in a rope could signal a hidden passage. The world was alive with coded meanings, whispers of strategies, legacies, and hopes. The human experience was encoded in the very objects and spaces of daily life. And still, despite the enormity of oppression, moments of beauty persisted, children laughing as they played by the river's edge, the sound of birds breaking the monotony of labor, the rustle of leaves carrying a breeze that cooled a scorching afternoon. In these instances, life asserted itself, fleeting, fragile, yet undeniable. A glance between mother and child, a smile hidden beneath exhaustion, a hand placed on another's shoulder. These were acts of defiance, declarations that life would persist. By evening, the plantation transformed. Shadows grew long. Lanterns flickered, revealing just enough to see one's immediate surroundings. Conversations became whispers, movements cautious. And yet the stories continued. Songs hummed under the breath, carrying not just entertainment, but history, memory, instructions, coded warnings. Each tale, whether spoken or implied, contributed to a web of resilience connecting generations past, present, and future. The boundaries between fact and folklore blurred, one reinforcing the other. And together they carried the essence of lives that refused erasure. As the night deepened, a stillness fell across the fields, the moon casting silver light over cotton stalks, distant sounds of insects, the rustle of water against the riverbank. Yet beneath the calm, a tension remained. The knowledge that each day held uncertainty, every act of survival a victory against the constant forces seeking to suppress. But in this tension lay strength. In this quiet endurance, a story worth telling, and a narrative that would ripple through the decades to come. The night had settled over the plantation like a shroud, thick, humid, oppressive, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and lingering sweat. In the fields, the cotton stalks swayed under the pale glow of moonlight. Yet among them, shadows moved differently, not quite human yet, not entirely of the soil. Whispers traveled through the rows, carried by wind that seemed to know secrets before the living could. It began with a single disappearance. Ezekiel 17, known for his quiet defiance, for the way he listened more than he spoke. One evening after the work had ceased, he vanished. No trace on the worn dirt paths, no footprints along the river's edge, no hint in the cabins where families huddled together for warmth and secrecy. The overseers noticed at first, but only as a procedural matter. Fate unknown recorded in the ledger, and life continued outwardly unchanged. But the air carried a tension, a charged anticipation. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig became a question, a warning. In the following nights, strange phenomena began to weave themselves into daily life. Lanterns flickered inexplicably. Distant sounds of drums echoed faintly across the fields, though no drummer was to be seen. Children spoke of seeing figures walking silently along the edges of the plantation, their faces pale eyes glimmering with intent or sorrow. No one could tell which. The adults whispered among themselves, half in fear, half in recognition. Stories from the elders recalled similar incidents decades ago. The spirits move when the living are in danger. One grandmother murmured her voice, a thread in the dark. Meanwhile, the human incidents escalated. A small town of free black families nearby suddenly emptied overnight. Homes abandoned, belongings left in haste. Newspapers noted mass evacuation under mysterious circumstances, but gave no explanation. Locals whispered that a fire or a Ngon Luama had passed through, leaving terror in its wake. Yet when outsiders inspected, no trace of flames remained. Only the eerie stillness of deserted streets, the faint smell of smoke lingering as if burned in memory rather than in reality. Among the enslaved, the tension was palpable. Eyes darted constantly. Gestures became coded. A tilt of the head, the shift of a hand, a pause in a song. These communicated warnings without words, and in this heightened awareness, courage found its way. Small acts of defiance hidden within labor. A bundle of seeds secretly sown outside assigned fields. A stolen moment of prayer beneath a tree. A whispered plan for escape conveyed in the rhythm of a song. Each act seemed insignificant alone, but collectively they were threads of resistance. Fragile yet potent. A second disappearance occurred on the edges of the swamp. Lillian, carrying a small child, vanished under cover of darkness. Witnesses later claimed to see a faint light bobbing in the distance, moving deliberately, as though guided by an unseen hand. Some said the light was spectral, a spirit escorting her to safety. Others insisted it was a human plan executed with cunning and precision. Either way, the pattern was clear. The invisible hand of resistance intertwined with the supernatural. Reality and folklore blending into one. At the same time, a black regiment serving in a distant theater of war reported a phantom alarm. Troops awakened in the dead of night to a clarion call. Orders shouted that made no sense. The commanding officer, after inspecting the perimeter, found no evidence of enemy forces. Yet the men swore the sound was real, urgent, and purposeful. Some described seeing shadowy figures among the trees. Others heard footsteps, heavy and rhythmic, like marching. The accounts filtered back to the plantations. Rumors spread. The folklore layer thickened. Phantom regiments became a metaphor, a caution, and a beacon. For those still bound to the fields, back on the plantations, a mother whispered to her children, "Do not follow what you see without thought. The spirits can guide, but they can also mislead. Learn to listen with your heart, not just your eyes." And the children, sensing both fear and hope, learned to navigate the night carefully, to interpret flickers of light as signs to hear the wind, as a messenger to trust instinct over instruction. In this environment, survival was both literal and spiritual. Every act carried meaning. Every pause in labor became a moment of contemplation, a meditation on the fragility of life and the persistence of hope. And then there were the fires. Not all literal. Some nights the fires appeared in the fields, dancing along rows of cotton, blue silver and orange light flickering without heat. People spoke of seeing figures pass through these lights, sometimes guides, sometimes warnings. The elders called them flames of memory, manifestations of souls unsettled. Others viewed them as harbingers, signs of danger yet to come. In either case, the phenomena reshaped the plantation's nights, changing behavior, modifying routines, instilling a rhythm of caution, of respect, of reverence. Even in mundane work, the tension manifested. The simple act of planting cotton, of carrying water, of tending livestock became intertwined with awareness. A glance could signal escape. A footstep could warn of peril. Every repetition of labor was layered with communication. Coded lessons passed along without formal words. For example, when a bucket tipped slightly left instead of right, it could indicate a safe path. A hand extended briefly toward the shadows could indicate an approach of danger. These seemingly trivial movements became part of a complex choreography of life and survival. In the cabins, life unfolded in parallel. Whispers of escapes and phantom sightings mingled with domestic concerns. Children learned stories of those who had disappeared. Parents instructed not just in survival, but in interpretation of signs. The lines between legend and fact blurred. A child might hear of a spirit guiding a runaway, and later see a person following a secret path. The human mind could not always distinguish, Yet the message was clear: awareness, vigilance, resilience, and the endurance of memory. By mid-season, the incidents had accumulated. A pattern emerged: disappearances, strange lights, phantom alarms, empty towns, all connected in a tapestry of tension and storytelling. The overseers grew increasingly agitated. Attempts to explain the disappearances failed. Official reports logged unknown causes or fate undetermined. But among the enslaved, knowledge circulated. The stories, the observations, the legends. They informed action. They shaped behavior. They became part of the very infrastructure of survival. And so the night and day continued. Labor and legend intertwined. Every shadow a possible threat. Every whisper a possible guide. The human incidents, disappearances, alerts, empty cabins combined with the folklore, ghost lights, phantom regiments, protective spirits to create a rich, layered reality. One that demanded attention, respect, and cautious interaction. The plantation was no longer just a site of labor. It was a stage for subtle revolt, for coded communication, for stories that would survive beyond written records. Fact and folklore reinforced one another. Each disappearance became both documented and mythologized. Each light in the night both real and spectral. And in this delicate balance, the human spirit endured. By the final nights of the season, the sense of something larger prevailed. A pattern beyond any single incident. The people of the fields, through their labor, their observation, their whispers, and their dreams, were creating a living map, a map of resistance, survival, and memory. And while the overseers could see the outward motions, they could never grasp the depth. The invisible currents that carried hope, that preserved identity, that honored the past. And so, rising from the shadows, the incidents continued to mount. Each disappearance, each strange illumination, each whispered warning. Not just a story, but a statement. Life persists. Resistance endures. And even in the darkest moments, the human spirit moves forward, guided by memory, intuition, and the legacy of those who came before. The morning broke slowly over the plantation. The horizon painted in muted shades of gray and gold. Dew clung to the cotton leaves, reflecting the light with a trembling clarity, as if the earth itself was aware. In the cabins, families stirred. Some rising before the sun, others still asleep under thin, worn blankets. The air was dense with the smell of smoke from cooking fires, the dampness of the river, and the faint sweetness of nearby sugarcane. Every sound chirping birds, the creak of timber. The murmur of water was amplified in the stillness, carrying messages only those attuned to the rhythm of the plantation could hear. The official records resumed their tone of stark documentation. Friedman's Bureau reports detailed escapes, labor disputes, and acts of subtle rebellion. A notation here, a ledger entry there. The words were precise, unemotional, as if stripping humanity could make the facts more digestible. Yet within the gaps, within the spaces between lines, the human element persisted. Each entry implied struggle, endurance, and the ever-present question of what became of those who disappeared. Names like Samuel Lillian, Ezekiel reappeared. Fate unknown, repeated like a refrain. And in these refrains, the truth of survival and myth intertwined. Stories passed along through generations added another layer. In hushed voices, elders spoke of rituals, performed in secret. Ceremonies at the edge of the bayou where the water reflected not only moonlight, but the hopes and fears of those who came before. People whispered of dream narratives, visions received in sleep. Sometimes a child awoke screaming, recalling the disappearance of a cousin in the night. Other times, visions of phantom soldiers marching through the trees guided escapees to safety. The line between dream and reality blurred, each tale carrying instruction, warning, or inspiration. And then there were the maps, crude sketches etched on scraps of paper, showing hidden paths through swamps, river crossings, and safe houses. Some maps were factual, detailing terrain and distance. Others were symbolic, a line drawn in charcoal representing more than distance, representing hope, secrecy, and survival. These artifacts were dangerous. If discovered, punishment was swift. Yet they persisted, passed hand to hand, whispered about in cabins, tucked beneath floorboards, or sewn into quilts. The maps carried knowledge beyond words, a fusion of fact and folklore. Guiding generations, the folklore deepened further with tales of spectral guardians, figures appearing in the moonlight, hovering over escaping families. Some were said to be ancestors, watching, protecting, guiding. Others were ominous, their presence a warning of danger, betrayal, or death. Witnesses described shimmering outlines along the riverbanks, their movements precise, deliberate, almost human, yet not. Some nights, drums echoed from deep within the cypress groves, although no living drummer was ever found. A rhythm that seemed to pulse in the chest, a heartbeat echoing across the fields. A connection between the living and the departed. Even in the practical tasks of daily life, these layers were ever present. Preparing food, mending clothing, tending animals, all became conduits of memory and guidance. A stitch placed incorrectly could serve as a warning. A rearranged bundle of firewood might indicate a path to safety. Songs hummed under breath or played softly on handmade instruments carried codes. Follow the river. Wait for the second bell. Turn left at the oak with the scarred trunk. Every act, every movement carried dual meaning. Fact and folklore intertwined seamlessly. At the same time, reports from urban centers filtered back into the rural communities. Newspapers in New Orleans and Baton Rouge chronicled new laws, social shifts, and the movements of black regiments. Articles spoke of people migrating along the Exoduster trails, moving toward freedom in Kansas, following the promise of land and opportunity. Yet these reports were incomplete, sanitized, and often ignored the human cost of travel. Families were split, children orphaned, parents left behind. And in these omissions, folklore took root. Tales of phantom travelers, spirits guiding those still in bondage, songs passed down as survival manuals. A particular account from a Freedmen's Bureau inspector detailed a night when several individuals disappeared simultaneously from neighboring plantations. The report claimed the cause was unknown, fate undetermined once more. Yet our oral accounts described a different reality. A group of enslaved people had coordinated their movement, guided by a series of lanterns placed along hidden paths. Some said the lanterns were lit by spirits, ancestors manifesting to lead them to safety. Others insisted it was a carefully orchestrated plan, human ingenuity masked as supernatural intervention. Either way, the event became legend, retold for decades, embedding itself into the consciousness of all who heard. And the phantom regiments, stories of black soldiers marching unseen. These narratives traveled far beyond the plantation. Soldiers themselves reported waking to alarms in the dead of night, responding to orders no one had issued. Shadows moved with rhythm, heavy boots sounding on soft earth. Some claimed to see the outline of familiar faces among the trees. Leaders lost in battle, children who had vanished decades earlier, guiding the living to safety. The phenomenon was never fully explained, and yet it became a symbol of resilience, unity, and the unseen forces that shaped survival. Amid this tapestry of fact and legend, small acts of defiance proliferated. Hidden tools sewn into clothing, baskets with secret compartments, instructions whispered during fieldwork. Each person consciously or unconsciously contributed to a collective knowledge base. Survival was a network, encoded in gestures, songs, objects. A living intelligence preserved against the ever-present threat of erasure. The enslaved transformed everyday labor into a language, a map, a story, blending reality with myth. The human experience was punctuated by moments of beauty, fleeting, fragile, yet profound. A child discovering a wildflower in the field. A bird's song breaking the monotony of toil. A hand clasped in solidarity. In these moments, the soul asserted itself, asserting the truth that, even under the weight of oppression, life persisted. Each act, however small, was a testament, a reminder that even in darkness, light could exist, and yet danger remained. The overseers, the owners, the law itself, ever present, ever watchful. The enslaved moved with caution, every movement measured, every word weighed. Even the smallest mistake could have devastating consequences. In this context, folklore was not mere entertainment. It was a survival mechanism, a guide, a repository of collective wisdom. As days turned into weeks, weeks into months, the plantation became a microcosm of struggle. Every disappearance, every unexplained sound, every ritual or dream was part of a larger narrative, one that intertwined human courage, ancestral guidance, and a persistent refusal to be erased. The physical and spiritual worlds overlapped. Reality and myth merged, creating a living story that survived in whispers, songs, maps, and memories. And so, by the end of this period, the plantation was both haunted and alive. Every individual was a storyteller, every song a lesson, every act of labor a message. The boundaries between fact and folklore dissolved, leaving a tapestry of human experience, a record not fully captured by ledgers, reports, or newspapers, but preserved nonetheless, in memory, in ritual, in spirit. And this duality, fact interwoven with legend, became the foundation of endurance, hope, and identity for generations to come. The night stretched endlessly across the plantation, shadows merging with the darkness of the swamp. And yet movement persisted, subtle, deliberate, each step measured. Each figure carried not only flesh and bone, but memory. The weight of ancestors, of lives, erased, of secrets preserved in whispered stories and coded songs. The wind shifted, carrying scents of damp earth, of sweat, of fire, of incense from clandestine rituals performed long ago. And in that wind, in that stillness, there was a rhythm, a heartbeat of resistance. The disappearances of the past weeks converged into a pattern. Ezekiel, Lillian, Samuel. Each disappearance like a note in a larger composition. And now in the darkest hour their stories intersected. Some claimed to see lights flickering among the cypress knees, lanterns bobbing, guiding warning. Others reported figures marching silently along the fields. Phantom regiments. Not entirely alive, not entirely dead. Their boots pressing into soil soaked with blood and tears. Each step a reminder of both suffering and defiance. Inside the cabins, whispers carried across walls. Tales of dreams that bled into reality. A child might awaken screaming, recalling the faces of those who had vanished. Elders interpreting signs in the moonlight, advising caution or daring escape. The boundaries between fact and folklore dissolved, each reinforcing the other. And in these convergences, the climax of human and spectral interaction reached its apex, a crescendo of tension, fear, and hope. The overseers sensed it too, though they could not name it. A presence that defied measurement. A series of events that seemed orchestrated beyond human understanding. Lanterns extinguished without cause. Livestock startled without reason. Doors opening and closing despite locks. And the workers, both terrified and emboldened, moved with a purpose, guided by instinct, by inherited knowledge, by whispers of the unseen. The night became a theater of shadow and light, every action a scene in a larger story. Reports from distant towns spoke of black regiments, Soldiers who had marched, then vanished, then appeared miles away. Phantom alarms, ghostly patrols, the faint echo of commands that had never been issued. Soldiers swore to hear footsteps, see figures in the mist, faces familiar, eyes glimmering in the moonlight. Children and elders on the plantations recognized these tales, connecting the distant echoes of war to the immediate reality of escape and survival. Fact and legend were indistinguishable, and yet both were essential. In one cabin near the riverbank, a group gathered, huddled around a flickering candle. An old woman recounted the disappearance of her cousin. A young boy listened intently. The candlelight flickered across their faces, casting shadows that seemed alive. The story merged with another, of Samuel seen guiding fugitives through the swamp, of Lillian, whose child's laughter echoed in the dark, and of Ezekiel, whose footprints traced invisible paths through fields and woods. Every narrative layer intertwined, each echo reinforcing the other, creating a web of memory and myth. Outside, the landscape itself seemed complicit. The swamps whispered. The river glimmered under moonlight. Cotton stalks swayed. The wind carried messages from one end of the plantation to the other. Even the animals appeared aware. Horses snorting, dogs, pacing birds, frozen mid-flight. All witnesses to a climax that transcended ordinary understanding. The human and supernatural converged, each influencing the other. And together they created a moment that could not be forgotten. And then the crescendo, a night of convergence unlike any before. Lanterns appeared on the horizon, moving slowly, rhythmically. Some human, some perhaps not. A group of enslaved people moved in tandem, shadows merging with shadows, their bodies carrying both physical and spiritual weight. Songs hummed softly, spirituals laden with coded instructions. Each note a signal, each pause a warning, every gesture a map. The night became alive with communication, silent yet audible to those who knew how to listen. In the distance, the phantom regiment appeared, or perhaps it was memory made manifest. Marching through the fields, through the mist, their boots pressing the soil of countless generations. Some claimed to see faces of those long dead guiding the living. Others swore it was a warning, an embodiment of sacrifice and resilience. The phenomenon transcended explanation, yet its impact was real. A shift in perception, a heightening of awareness. The enslaved moved with new courage, informed by the presence that defied comprehension. Every step taken that night carried layered significance. A child leading another to safety. A bundle hidden beneath a tree. A note slipped under a cabin floorboard. All acts seemingly mundane were amplified by the heightened tension of the night. The wind, the water, the moonlight, all participated. Every natural element a messenger, a participant in the unfolding drama. Fact and folklore were inseparable, each amplifying the other, and together they created a climax that could not be ignored. The human scenes inside the cabins mirrored the events outside. Families whispered prayers and songs. Gestures carried meaning. Eyes met across tables and beds, all aware that survival required vigilance, courage, and understanding of the unseen. Even in sleep, dreams carried instruction. Visions of paths to freedom, encounters with protective spirits, the faint glow of lanterns moving silently through the night. The subconscious became a repository of strategy and hope. By midnight, the events reached their peak. The convergence of disappearances, phantom alarms, ghostly lights, songs, rituals, and whispered instructions created a dense web. The plantation itself seemed to breathe. The soil vibrating with history, with memory, with resistance. Every footstep, every gesture, every note of song was magnified, each layered with multiple meanings. The night was simultaneously real and spectral, terrifying and inspiring, oppressive and liberating. In this climax, the narratives converged. Ezekiel's path intersected with Lillian's. Samuel guided children and elders alike. Phantom regiments echoed in distant fields, and every individual's act contributed to a collective invisible orchestration. The culmination was not a single event, but a tapestry of simultaneous occurrences intertwined with memory, myth, and survival. It was an apex of tension, a moment where history and legend became indistinguishable, where human resilience coded communication and spiritual guidance coalesced. As dawn approached, the intensity subsided, yet the echoes remained. The fields whispered of what had occurred. The cabin smelled of smoke and earth. Children awoke with memories of dreams that were more than dreams. Elders recounted stories with renewed urgency. And in that quiet aftermath, the significance of the night was understood. Not just as a series of mysterious events, but as a demonstration of endurance, ingenuity, and the unbroken human spirit. The climax was not an isolated incident. It was the embodiment of centuries of oppression, resistance, and survival. It illustrated the delicate balance between fear and courage, between reality and legend. The human spirit, guided by memory dreams and shared knowledge, navigated the convergence of visible and invisible forces and emerged intact, transformed, and resolute. And so, in the stillness of early morning, with mist rising from the swamp, with cotton stalks glistening with dew, the climax concluded. Yet its impact resonated. Every participant, human and spectral, had played a role. Every song, every gesture, every whispered instruction contributed. The night had revealed the depth of endurance, the intricacy of communication, the interweaving of fact and folklore, and set the stage for the aftermath that would echo through decades, through memory and into history. The sun rose over the fields, not with brilliance, but with a muted light that seemed hesitant, as though aware of the weight of history pressed upon the soil. The cotton stalks shimmered with dew, each droplet reflecting centuries of labor, of sorrow, of resilience. The cabins, though weathered and worn, stood as silent witnesses, walls thick with stories, floors etched with footsteps, long gone ceilings, heavy with the echoes of whispered prayers and lullabies. The disappearances, the phantom regiments, the spectral lights, the coded songs, all of it had left an imprint. The land itself remembered. Every path trodden, every bundle hidden, every hand extended in secret. The soil retained the memory of struggle, and the river carried away whispers to those who would listen. Even decades later, descendants would recall the stories. Oral histories handed down with reverence, each generation adding layers, interpretations, and personal insight. Fact and folklore had fused into a legacy, one that could not be erased. In the towns and cities, the memory persisted as well. Harlem, years later, would become a hub for those carrying fragments of these stories. Jazz and spirituals, vibrant and improvisational, held echoes of the hidden rhythms from the fields. The coded messages, embedded in songs, once practical tools for survival, transformed into expressions of identity and resistance. Musicians unknowingly perpetuated the legacy of caution, instruction, and memory. Rhythms and melodies rooted in centuries-old knowledge, each note a tribute to those who endured. Yet the echoes were not only in music. Ghost stories continued to circulate. Tales of figures seen at the edge of swamps, shadows crossing fields at night, lanterns appearing without source. In some communities, children still played near riverbanks, listening to elders recount the vigilance and courage of ancestors. In others, scholars pieced together fragments from newspapers, Freedmen's Bureau reports, and WPA narratives. Each story became a bridge, connecting past to present, the living to the spectral, reality to legend. The plantations themselves, though, altered by time and human development, still retained signs of memory. Foundation timbers cracked and weathered held the weight of centuries. Floorboards creaked under new footsteps. Yet the echoes of those long gone seemed to ripple in counterpoint. Visitors reported fleeting glimpses, shadows that moved independently of the wind. Unexplained sounds, whispers, faint footsteps that could not belong to any living soul. The landscape had become a living archive, preserving the endurance, suffering, and ingenuity of those who once walked it. Family lineages carried the legacy too. Children and grandchildren remembered the stories, sometimes in fragmented form, sometimes fully. Names of the disappeared, long erased from official records, resurfaced in personal narratives. The rituals performed in secret by ancestors persisted in modified forms. Certain nights' spirituals were sung as homage. Some instruments maintained their original patterns, embedding messages from centuries past. Hand gestures, sewing patterns, even the placement of objects in the home preserved knowledge of survival and resilience. Each act, each story, each memory reinforced identity, asserting continuity in the face of historical erasure. In the broader historical context, the events of the plantation had ripple effects. Exodus migrations, Reconstruction-era movements, urban resettlement in cities like New Orleans and Chicago. The consequences of survival strategies of encoded knowledge, of whispered instructions, manifested in communities that thrived despite systemic oppression. Leaders arose drawing on the collective memory. Activists, educators, musicians, spiritual guides, all informed by ancestral experience. The echoes of those nights of disappearance and guidance informed new forms of resistance, new avenues of cultural preservation, new ways to assert humanity. Yet the ghosts remained figuratively and literally. Reports from historians, folklorists, and residents detailed sighting sounds and sensations. Some dismissed these accounts, others recognized their significance. The spirits, whether literal or symbolic, represented continuity, memory, resistance. Each story recounted, each sighting documented, reinforced a lineage of courage. An understanding that survival was not merely physical, but psychological, cultural, and spiritual. Communities adapted but did not forget. Rituals became embedded in festivals, spiritual gatherings, and community storytelling. Nighttime songs held dual-purpose celebration and remembrance. Children learned lessons encoded in fables and parables. Guidance warnings, inspiration passed through generations. The plantation, though changed, remained a teacher. A site where the invisible curriculum of endurance, strategy, and memory continued to unfold. And in the quiet moments, when the wind shifted just right across the river, when the moonlight struck the fields at a certain angle, when songs were sung softly at dusk, the weight of history could be felt, a presence, a reminder that what happened could never truly be erased. The echoes of the vanished, of the phantom regiments, of the coded songs, lingered in the landscape, in memory, in spirit, and in culture. For those listening, for those witnessing through these stories, the lesson is clear. History is not solely in the ledgers, nor confined to dry official reports. It lives in memory, in ritual, in song, in the rhythm of labor, and in the whispers of folklore. The human spirit, tested, oppressed, yet resilient, can survive beyond circumstance, can communicate, guide, and teach, can endure in ways both tangible and spectral. And now, as the narrative draws to its conclusion, imagine standing in those fields. Feel the soil beneath your feet. Smell the river, the cotton, the earth. Listen, faintly, almost imperceptibly. You might hear a song, a whisper, footsteps. The rhythm of life persisting through decades. Though the plantations are silent, the stories remain alive. In memory, in culture, in spirit. The tale does not end with this narration. It continues in every song sung at dusk, in every story passed to children, in every acknowledgement of those whose names were never recorded, whose fates were unknown. Spirituals still rise, ghost stories still circulate, and the legacy of resilience continues to inform the present. History is alive, carried in breath, in song, in silence. You have just witnessed a fragment, a single thread from a tapestry too vast to capture entirely. But threads connect, across time, space, and memory. And as you reflect, consider the lives you cannot see, the voices you cannot hear, and the courage that persists. The echoes of these stories are not confined to the past. They are carried into the present and into the future. So before we close, leave a thought. Leave a comment. Where are you listening from? What moments of courage, endurance, or memory have touched you today? How do the echoes of the past resonate in your own experience? The story continues, and you are part of the audience that ensures it is never forgotten.